We've got Brother Paul Hellyer. Do you want to introduce him, Brother Martin?
Oh, I'm going to let you introduce him, but I will say that it's fantastic to have him come on the show because I think he's our first former government official to come on and be a whistleblower sort of on the show.
Yeah, this is a little bit, in my opinion, this is a little bit like having Jimmy Carter or Ronald Reagan or one of those guys, because he's not somebody that can be easily dismissed, and yet he's going to expose some things that a lot of people don't believe and don't want to believe, and it's coming from the highest levels of the Canadian government. So I'm ready to add him. He's an awesome brother, and we're privileged to have him on.
Yeah.
We probably will keep it a little shorter. I do want to say this. Go ahead and feel free to ask questions immediately, even now, because we're gonna shorten it up for him. And what we're gonna do is have him on for about 20 minutes. 10 minutes, somewhere in there, and then at the end we'll give him a few questions and then let him go on with his evening, because he's a busy man and he's got things to do. So we won't keep him all night. We'll go ahead and after that we'll show the videos and we'll talk, and we'll have more testimonies and so on. So it'll be two different groups of questions and answers. If Brother Paul wants to stay for the first group, there'll be two groups. So hopefully that doesn't confuse anybody. Anyway, we'll add him in now. Brother Paul Hellyer, former Minister of National Defense of Canada. Hello, Brother Paul. Are you there?
Hi, how are you?
It's awesome to have you. You've served in 3 governments, is what I understand. Is that correct?
That's right. The first one, Louis Saint Laurent, way back in, 1957, I guess. And then the Pearson government all the way through, and then the year with Mr. Trudeau.
That's awesome. That's awesome, and we're honored to have you on the show, brother. And it's wonderful that you're willing to talk about some things that a lot of government or former government officials are afraid to talk about.
Well, I like to tell the truth, and especially if it's important.
It is, yeah, and I would say this is one of the most important subjects that most people do not know the truth about. Yeah, would you agree, brother?
Yes, which one?
Well, the one about extraterrestrials. Do you have some other truths you'd like to share besides the...
Well, there are a lot of things, like who's running the world and so on, but the extraterrestrials is one of the best-kept secrets in the world, probably only second best to the way the banking and international financial system works.
Excellent. Well, we'll cover both of those if you'd like. You go right ahead. We'll let you talk. You've got about 15 minutes, and I may occasionally jump in with a question or two, or Brother Martin may jump in with a question or two.
Yep, brother.
Well, let me start with the monetary thing. We have a situation in the world today which is absolutely insane, where 97% of all the money created is created by privately owned banks. And it's all created as debt. It's all created as debt on which interest has to be paid. And yet nobody creates any money with which to pay the interest. So the only thing you can do is to borrow more and go deeper and deeper into debt. And then you get into the situation that the United States is in today, and even worse in Europe, Spain and Greece and all of those countries, because they have to go cap in hand to private bankers to get their money, when in fact governments own the right to create money. They own the patent, and Canada or the United States could create enough money to get their economies up and running in no time flat, and all they have to do is just bring the bankers to toe and take away some of their privileges and reduce their leverage and start producing the money that would provide millions of jobs. So this has been my passion, the reason I went into politics more than 60 years ago, because I was a child of the Depression, and I never wanted to see another one. I didn't think we'd ever see anything like we have now, but we have, and it didn't need to happen. It was precipitated by Wall Street, and just like they brought on the Great Depression in 1929, because a few of the biggest banks were selling short and benefited from it, and by bringing on a depression, they put all the little banks out of, not all of them, but a lot of the little banks out of business so they could grow and have a bigger market share. And the whole banking situation worldwide is really one gigantic fraud. It's a great big Ponzi scheme whereby the banks lend the same money to 15 or 20 different people and collect interest on it from each and every one of them. Now, that's grand larceny.
Yep.
But how they get away with it, I don't know, except I do know because they have succeeded in persuading generations of kings and queens and emperors and politicians to grant them licenses and then to just let them make their own rules and go their own way. And unless and until something is done about it, the future is very bleak. It just happens to be 100 years this year since Congress sold the U.S. down the river by letting private bankers establish the Federal Reserve System, which is neither federal nor reserve, and to let them create the money supply and determine the money supply. And it was right away they recognized as one of the biggest mistakes that had ever been made, but then they didn't do anything about it. So this 100th anniversary would be the most wonderful time for the Congress to say, hey, our predecessors made a terrible mistake 100 years ago, and we're going to take back some of that power, and we're going to take over the Fed, and we're going to create enough money so that the government can balance its budget and so on without higher taxes. And that is all possible, and it's all sensible, but nobody's even talking about it, let alone doing anything about it. So I've been deeply involved for the last, many years, but my latest campaign in Canada here has been the last few months, trying to get the government to change the system and you can say print or create, it doesn't matter. Most people don't know what money is. It's just a computer entry, that's all it is. Create enough money to put the unemployed back to work and get the economy up and robust and have prosperity instead of austerity. Because Franklin Roosevelt tried austerity in the latter part of the Great Depression after having stimulated the American economy for several years and had it working fairly well. Then he had a austerity budget and set the whole thing back about 3 years, and the Great Depression lasted longer than it should have. And we're doing exactly the same thing today, which only proves that we don't learn from experience. And I think it was Einstein who said that to do the same thing over and over again and expect different results is a form of insanity.
Yeah.
So that's where we stand on that issue.
Can you explain to us, the audience, what the difference between prosperity and austerity, more specifically what that is?
Well, absolutely. Austerity is what we have now, when we're cutting back on social services and cutting back on safety measures and cutting back on just about everything, cutting back on the number of teachers in the schoolroom and doing all of that sort of thing. And instead of a situation like we had prior to 2007, for example, when there were jobs available and when the economy was booming and when we weren't going at least as much into debt, which of course you shouldn't be going into at all at the federal level. They should create enough money to pay their own deficit, to meet their own deficit, and then to subsidize each of the states so that they wouldn't have to start borrowing money and cutting back and doing all of the things that they've been doing in the states for the last few years. It's just absolute insanity. And to let it go on and on is something that I don't know how they get away with it, but the bankers are so powerful and they have created this myth. One of the myths is that if you go into the bank to borrow money, that they lend you the money that somebody else deposited the day before. Well, that's just not true. They create it, and they create it out of thin air. And it's just a privilege. And they shouldn't have an exclusive monopoly on creating money, which they've managed to develop in the last, over really about 2.5 centuries, getting bigger and bigger slice of the pie until now they create just about all of the new money that's created. And it's got to stop.
Yeah, thank you for exposing that. We've exposed this on the show before, but we've never had anybody with your background and credentials and know-how, able to voice that very eloquently.
Well, you know, I don't advertise other people's books very much, but there's one written by a lawyer there in California. It's called The Web of Debt. And I'm telling you, if you read the first 100 pages of that, you'll understand how the bankers pull the wool over the eyes of the American people, and maybe have some insight into how they're still doing it.
Excellent. Excellent.
Let me pop in here real quick, Brother Paul. This is Timothy Martin. I'm sort of the co-host here, but I have a question for you. Are other government officials, do they know this? In other words, because you talk to a lot of high-level officials, I would think, occasionally, and do they know this scam is going on and they just ignore it, or are they actually trying to do something about it?
I think neither. I don't think they understand, and most of them are too lazy to take the time to learn about it. And consequently, if you don't understand, you don't do anything about it.
Right.
You just sort of accept, well, it's always been this way, and we go into debt, and we have to cut back, and we have to squeeze the schools and squeeze everything in austerity, which is just exactly the wrong way to go. And why people do it is because they don't know any better, I guess. And it's time they really educated themselves. There's a website that a few of us put up here a couple of years ago called victoryfortheworld.net. I think it is. I'll just double check. victoryfortheworld.net. And anybody that wants to learn how the system really works could go there. And one of the two books that I have two books still sort of circulating. One is Light at the End of the Tunnel, a survival plan for the human species. And if you want to know what's going on in the world and who's pulling the strings, it'll give you a very good idea. Not only that, but also some of the things that need to be done about it. And the other one's called A Miracle in Waiting, Economics That Makes Sense. Well, actually, the latter one is really only appropriate to people who know a little bit of economics. But the first one will tell you what's going on in the world, and it has a good chapter on the banking system, outlines the history of it in the U.S., and also says what has to be done. And either one of those books can be ordered through my website, which is paulhellierweb.com. It's paulhellierweb.com, or from Amazon.
Excellent, excellent. We're a solution-conscious organization, and we've got about 20,000 viewers that watch recorded. Live, we have about between 50 and 100, and so not a lot live. But this goes up on a few websites, and within about 6 months or so, you'll get over 20,000 people listening. Maybe 50. We've had as many as 50,000 on one show already, so maybe as many as 50,000. So that's awesome that you've got these books available on your website. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes. It's paulhellierweb.com. I couldn't get anything other than that when I registered it.
Oh, I think that's awesome. paulhellierweb.com, and we'll put that up on our information page that goes underneath the video as well. So if somebody's listening and you didn't quite hear it, just read what's written down below the video, and you'll find it. So that's awesome. And now, if you don't mind, tell us a few of the solutions. In other words, it sounds like and a lot, some of our audiences are educated on economics, so it sounds like the miracle in waiting sounds like you figured out the solution, or God's helped you figure out the solution. And if you don't mind sharing that with us a little bit.
Sure, a couple of minutes on that would be a good idea.
Excellent.
What the world needs is a massive infusion of government-created money. And I don't know how much, but I would say maybe of the order of something like 20 trillion worldwide. Because under the present system, where all of the money is created like debt by the private banks, when they have a recession like we had in 2007, 2008, the banks that created the money, when they start calling their loans, destroy money. It's just like taking a whole barrel full of $20 bills and shoveling them into the furnace. So the purchasing power, the amount of money is in circulation, the purchasing power of the people goes down, and then they don't have enough money to pay for the goods and services that are being provided in the economy, and people are laid off, and you get this high unemployment. Well, then, under the present system, the only way you get out of that is to borrow more and to go deeper and deeper into debt. And that's, of course, what they're encouraging these countries in Europe to be doing today, is to keep borrowing from the banks in order to pay the banks off and pay the bonds off for the money that they've already been lent. And what we have to do is to get governments to use their power to create a lot of. In Canada, we've just made a recommendation to our government to create about $150 billion a year for 7 years and change the system and reinstate the necessity for banks to have cash reserves against their deposits, which at the present time they don't have, practically zero. And so if you multiply that by 10 for the United States, I would say that an initial government spending spree in the United States of government-created money should be of the order of $1.5 trillion or $2 trillion, something of that order, because your economy is a little over 10 times as big as ours. And it is really a question of, first, as we just said, governments, leaders in the government, most of them at least, don't understand, and they take their advice from people who are deliberately misleading them, because they turn to the bankers. And one of the things I noticed as soon as the Obama government was formed, I looked at his bevy of financial advisors and said, game over before we start, because they're the same gang that go into the Treasury and into the Fed and into one party or another and back and perhaps from one to another. And so what they need is some fresh thinking, and there are people in the United States that really understand this thing that I'm talking about. I was talking to, or had an email from one of them today, a chap by the name of Bill Still, and he's done a series of things on money. I think the Money Masters was his.
And he's doing some movies. We've had him as a guest on our program already. Yeah, he's an awesome brother, and he's got.
You've had him on. Well, you should get him back on again to talk about his new film.
Yeah, it just come out, right? The new film just came out. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's got me in that a bit. He said today.
He's got what?
He has me in that new film a bit. He said today.
Excellent. Well, yeah, enough people start talking about it, waking people up. It should help get the politicians educated. It should.
Sure, people could Google him and get. He's done 2 or 3 things, and I think you could find them all without very much trouble looking for them.
Excellent.
And I would highly recommend it. Now, this is the most urgent problem facing the world today. The biggest problem is global warming, but we can't solve the global warming unless governments have the money available, the financial flexibility, as I call it, to switch from the oil economy to a clean energy economy. And then the third thing you have to have is the technology for clean energy, and that's where the extraterrestrials have come in, because they, along with some of the people in the United States and the members of the cabal, as they're called, have developed this clean energy, and it's there to be used, except they won't make it available, because they're somehow, and I don't know where the morality comes from, the same people own the banks, control the banks, and control the oil companies, and they want to cash in their oil chips before they release this new technology, when we haven't got that kind of time. They're talking
Right.
about 20 or 30 years. They're still drilling oil wells.
That's right. You're absolutely right. And of course, our organization's also forefront on solutions energy-wise. And so, yeah, it's awesome. Before we go into that, I want you to comment. But before we go on to extraterrestrials and energy and so on, if you don't mind, would you comment on Iceland and what they did? You think they did a good job as far as fixing the banking situation in their country?
They did a wonderful job because they just refused to kowtow to the bankers and pay off a lot of debts that should never have been incurred in the first place.
That's right. That's excellent. Excellent. And did they create government money as well and infuse that into their economy?
Well, I think they're doing that. I would have to double check. I haven't looked at it recently.
Yeah, I've heard the economy actually got quite a bit better, and of course the bankers and all the news was saying it was the worst thing they could have done, but it looks like it was the best thing they could have done.
Well, that's absolutely right. If the bankers say it's the worst thing, well, you can assume that it's the best
thing. You're probably right. You're probably right.
So.
All right, excellent.
If Greece had done the same thing, they wouldn't be in such a lot of. The real problem with Greece is that they joined the euro area, and those countries gave up their rights to create their own money in favor of the European Union.
Yeah.
So that's part of their problem today, and they've got to persuade the European Central Bank to do what you can do if it was your own central bank.
Yeah.
And that is to create some money and make it available to the governments to spend into circulation, not to borrow it. The Fed, for example, has created more than $2 trillion in what they call quantitative easing, and all of that money has gone into the banking system. It hasn't gone into the pockets of the people. And it's got to get into the pockets of the people if you want the economy to improve, because the people have to have more, what the economists call disposable income, more income left over after they pay their taxes in order to start buying again and to start spending again and get the economy up and running. And, Maynard Keynes went halfway, he was half right back in the old days. He said that you run deficits when you're in trouble, when your economy is down, and then tax higher when it's up. But what he and Milton Friedman both didn't understand was that they assumed that the economy was self-regulating, and it's not. And so that's the reason that you have to go the second step and have governments actually create some proportion of the money debt-free. And in the formula that I recommend in A Miracle in Waiting, I recommend that after getting the economy up and running, that governments themselves create 34% of the money and only allow the private banks to create 66% instead of the 97% that they're creating at the present time. And that would be a sharing of this function. And it would mean that governments at all levels, at the federal level, the state level, and the municipal level, would all be able to balance their budgets and all be able to do it without raising taxes, probably with lowering some taxes. And if they adopted the same formula that I'm recommending in Canada at the present time, which incidentally you can get from Victory, I think I mentioned victoryfortheworld.net, you can see what it is. And if they adopted that same formula in the United States, you'd be able to pay down about a third of your total federal debt in the period of 7 years.
Excellent. Well, wonderful suggestions, brother. And I want to encourage people to send in any questions they have for you in regards to any of these subjects we've been discussing. And let's move on a little bit. It's awesome to have you on the show, brother. Somebody that really knows, Brother Paul Hellyer, former acting Prime Minister of Canada. And if you don't mind, tell us a little bit about the extraterrestrials and what's really going on there, and maybe why they're keeping such secrets and so on.
Well, I can give you a few broad bits of information. First of all, 8 years ago now, I was the first person of cabinet rank in the G8 group of countries to say unequivocally that UFOs are as real as the airplanes flying overhead. And I was sure of that when I said it, and I'm even more sure now. And there were crashes at Roswell. There were actually crashes before Roswell,
Yeah.
which occurred. The ones there occurred, the two of them, in July of 1947. But there had been crashes before that, one in New Mexico in 45 and one in the Pacific Ocean. And but sort of the interest in this subject began with Roswell. It was sort of the timeline said, not that the Earth began in 47, but the interest in UFOs began in 47. And that's when the United States government really started getting interested in it, because it was soon after the war. And I think the armed forces were really shocked, flabbergasted really, to find out that somebody had technology that was superior to their own, because they'd gone through the war and helped win the Second World War, and they were feeling their oats. And all of a sudden, these UFOs crashed, and they said, wow, there's technology here that we don't understand at all, because they didn't have any combustion engines, they didn't have storage tanks for oil or anything like that. And so they had to start working to try and find out how they worked and to get the secrets. So they put together a group headed by Dr. Vannevar Bush, and you've probably heard of the Majestic 12. He was a member of the original Majestic 12. And he got a group of scientists together that started what they call back engineering the technology, and you know, it covered a wide range of things. They had like fiber optics and microchips and improved lasers, all sorts of technology that they really borrowed from the extraterrestrials and started developing it for use by the United States. Well, this is, despite government denials, this has been going on ever since. And you now have these huge underground facilities in Nevada and Arizona and New Mexico, where they have what, as you well know, are called the black operations. And some of the things they do there, I'm sure the American people would not approve of, which may be one reason that they don't want disclosure. And but the technology they've developed in that number of decades is mind-boggling. And I don't think anybody, probably anybody, knows just how big it is if you could measure the whole thing. But they've been developing new weapons, and they've been developing new kinds of flying craft using some of the technology that they've learned from the extraterrestrials, and they have in fact had some help from extraterrestrials, at least from two of the species, from some of the grays and some of the tall whites, and they have worked together and exchanged information, exchanged technology, and it's hard to know exactly what they've got because they won't disclose it. But Ben Rich, who was in charge of the Lockheed Skunk Works and who was an insider in this thing before he died, told a group of his classmates that we have the technology to take ET home. Well, that's something, isn't it?
That's pretty amazing. Absolutely, that is absolutely. Yeah, I'm aware, and we've mentioned on shows, but it's good to repeat by somebody like you that what you just said, that they have made treaties, they have made technology exchange agreements with extraterrestrial organizations or extraterrestrials.
And the reason I was at the Citizens Disclosure hearing in Washington a couple of weeks ago.
Excellent.
And had the privilege of being the final speaker. And my principal interest in, well, first of all, I don't like a culture of deceit. And I can understand why maybe some of these things were such that they had to keep them a secret, you know, until the end of the Cold War, until the U.S. was in a clear position of dominance. But then after that, I don't see any reason why they shouldn't let the American people know what they've been paying for all these years, what's been accomplished, and what Congress has let slip through that they haven't bothered to keep track of in accordance with their constitutional responsibilities. And not only that, but to take advantage of the technology in various areas. The ETs are way ahead of us in agriculture and in medicine, and there is some suggestion that the reason they're not making some of these things known is because they have too much investment in the pharmaceutical companies. But the one I'm most interested in is the new exotic forms of energy, because I'm told they have developed zero-point energy to the point that a small box would be enough to heat your house and provide you with all of the power that you need. And the reason I'm so concerned is that I figure that we have just a few years. In my book, I say 10 years, but that 2 years has gone by, so we have about 8 years to replace the power source in every car, truck, tractor, airplane, and home on Earth in order to stop the global warming before it's too late.
I agree with you 100%. And by the way, I'm one of those scientists that have worked on these, you could say, black box projects or black projects. And we can, a small box the size of a shoebox could easily run a house. You could actually run a whole subdivision with something like that.
Well, this is what we've got to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what our organization's pulling for. You know, one of the goals, we'd like to get this stuff into mass production. It is a challenge because there's an establishment in place that doesn't want it out yet. And like you say, they want to wait another 20 years, which is not, it needs to be done now, So.
But what about the morality of people who would jeopardize the future of the world as a hospitable habitat in order to make a few more $100,000 or $1 million or $1 billion that is of no use to them beyond just enough to provide their real needs?
It's absolutely mind-boggling what's going on financial-wise. So if you've got any connections, you can help us get this stuff out. You just let us know. Of course, we can talk about it more. You're welcome.
Well, I understand that there are some moves in that direction, and I just hope and pray that the rumors are substantive and not just some more rumors.
Yeah. And we can talk about it more. You're welcome to call me, Brother Paul, anytime off show, by the way, and we can talk about it further. But, you may have some connections and may be able to help us get this thing moving forward.
Okay, well, I guess I better sign off. And thank you for
you're welcome.
The opportunity.
You're welcome. If you'd like to stay for a couple more questions, you're welcome to. But if you need to go, we understand. Totally understand.
I think maybe I better sign off because I have a very heavy.
We understand. Totally
3 days
understand.
coming up.
Thank you so much for being our guest. It's wonderful. Maybe we'll be able to have you on again. Thank you so much.
Not at all. It was a pleasure.
All right.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye. Okay, well, that's wonderful. That's Paul Hellyer, former acting Prime Minister for Canada, and he's actually been in 3 governments. He's served as Ministry of National Defense, where they merged the Canadian militaries all into one force, basically. So yeah, he would have had. You did have some questions for him, but he's got a big day tomorrow. He's a busy man, and so I told him he could go anytime he wanted.
I just wish we had more public officials that were like that.
Right. That's right. More people willing to expose the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. So if you got, yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome, and he's a brave man too. We got Brother Zingles just said U.S. presidents have been assassinated for private central banks, for fighting private central banks. What can we do? And of course, that's a great question, Brother Zingel. And hopefully we'll be able to have Paul back. He may have answered some of these questions in his books. He's got 2 books, which I didn't know about this, so it's awesome that he has 2 books. And one of them is A Miracle in Waiting, so it sounds like a great concept, that got the solutions in there. I do agree with him that the governments need to step in. It would be nice if the people would step in and do it rather than governments, but unfortunately, I don't think it'll happen where people get organized enough. Trying to get people organized seems like it's a challenge basically. But it'd be nice if the people, because the government's supposed to be the people. It's supposed to be an organization of people. It would be nice if the people, came up with the money, invented the money, or imprinted the money, or invented the money to pay the situation, get the economy rolling again, and not have a debt base like they have, and not have private bankers like you have, but actually have the people. And we've talked about this on past programs, and it is totally doable. The people can do it. It just takes people working together and organized. And so it's awesome. So Brother Ziegel, I don't think I'll. Well, I can't answer that. We'll get to that later. I think we'll come back to the questions later. I'll try to answer them as best I can. But what do you think, Brother Martin? Should we do it that way?
Yeah, that'd be fine. I just I was going to say something there, and it just flew out of my head. But I know what I was going to say. It sounds like his book was very much in alignment with the things that we talk about every week, and that's it's so amazing to me that here a guy came out of government. However, I do think when he was very, very young, I think he actually was an engineer of some type, an aeronautical engineer or something like this. He was trained in aeronautics. So he's got an engineering background from a long time ago, but he went into politics and or government. And so it's really, really refreshing to hear that type of, vision coming from someone like him, because it's so much in alignment with the things that we talk about every week.
Amen. Amen. Yeah, it's awesome to have him on. He's an older brother. He's been serving in the government for 60 years, he said. So that means he's got to be like close to 80.
I think he's like 86 or something, or 89 even. He's
sharp as a tack. Sharp as a tack for 89. That's awesome. That's just awesome. I hope he lives forever. We need to keep people like him around.
Exactly.
He's an awesome brother.